Hello again. Alright, we're still on chapter 4, mathematical functions. We're talking now about these new functions. What is a function? Function is anything that you call on the right hand side of the equal sign, or if you put it in a rich edit. Well, we haven't done rich edit yet, but just imagine you have a colon, equal sign, there, and on the right hand side you put your function. Now the ones that we're going to cover in this chapter are square, SQR, for the square of a number, square root of a number, rounding a number to no decimal places, just like we normally do mathematical rounding. 13.5 is 14 and minus 13.5 is minus 14. And then trunc is just chopping off any decimal points. Then the last one is random. Now there is a random function, but it's more difficult to use, so we teach you the random range function. So don't worry about random, just think of random range. Right, so square, now the thing is with functions, they have data types. Like square returns a real data type. Square root, SQRT, returns a real data type. Round will return an integer because you're rounding to a whole number, and trunc returns an integer because you're getting rid of decimal points, and random range is only integers, and random range will return an integer which will be a random number in the range that you specify. So if you want a random number from 1 to 10, then you can do that. The processor will generate a number, any number that it feels like generating from 1 to 10. Could be 5, could be 4, could be 3, whatever the processor chooses. So we're actually going to jump straight into the deep end. There's a whole lot of explanation here and you can read through that, but let's practice makes perfect. So we're going to go straight to this activity here, 4.1 on page 75, and then we'll do activity 4.8.1. Right, calculate the square root of 100. We're going to write down code on paper, but I'm going to do it over here in this Excel spreadsheet. Sorry about that, I've got my hypotenuse sitting over here. Let's go and put it over there. Right, I'm going to say we want to take the square root of a number, square root of 100. So I'm going to make a variable and say R number colon equals square root, SQRT, in brackets, I'm going to put the 100. And that is how we write the code for the square root of 100. There's my function, SQRT. Take note, I didn't use capital letters, it's fine, but I made a real number equal to the square root of 100. So that's number 1. Second one, select a random number between 0 and 10, but don't include the 10. So square root, we know how to do that. We just put a number inside the brackets. But random, we're going to use random range from 0 to 9. We don't want the 10, we want the 9. Only from 0 to 9. And it says between. That means we mustn't have the 0 either. Yeah. So it's only going to be from 1 to 9. Rephrase that. They want a number from 1 to 9. Okay, if you want a random number from 1 to 9, then I'll say R num colon equals random range. Now here's the tricky part. A random range, you have two numbers in brackets. You can have 1, 5, okay? Now that random range 3, and 5 is going to generate a random number from 3 to 4, not 5. If I put in here random range, let's say 6 and then 12, then the numbers that we will have is from 6 to 11. Okay, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, but not the 12. Get the idea? They want a random number between 0 and 10, so in other words 1 to 9. So over here I'm going to put in 1 comma, not 9 but 10. So the second parameter, we call them parameters, the things that are in brackets after your function. Say square root, sqrt is a function, random range is a function. On the right hand side of my assignment statement, that colon and equals called an assignment statement. But in brackets you have a certain number of things, and we call those parameters. Parameters of a function, the things that are in brackets. And in random range we have two things. The first one is the starting point of the number, the lowest number that we want to generate. And then the second parameter is the highest number plus 1. So if I want a number from 1 to 9, the processor can generate any number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that it feels like generating for RNum, and 10 is got to be the parameter there if we want a number from 1 to 9. So remember that. Next one is round the number, 13.45. So are we going to say RNum colon equals round, and in brackets we put 13.45. That's it. It's only one thing. Oh, remember I said round only returns an integer? Well, if I made a real number equal to that, it will still be okay, because integers are like a small subset of real numbers. But just to be specific, I'll make inum equal round that. I could not put inum over there, and I couldn't put inum over there. Oh wait, I could put inum, a random number. I can put inum there or rnum, but I could not put an inum for the square root, because square root has to be a real number. So if you get an integer is also part of real numbers, so you can say rnum equals random range, okay? But I'm going to use inum because that's more accurate, so to speak. Whereas square root, you have to use a real data type. Now we're going to go to calculate the square of 7.1. Now square is only going to return a real number. So rnum equals square, and in brackets 7.1. We cannot put inum equal to square, because that would be a real number, and you can't make an integer equal to a real number. But because a random range generates an integer, you can say an integer, you can say an rnum equals to an integer. You can say a real equals an integer, but you can't do it the other way around. You can't say an integer equals a real number. Nope. So your left hand side, right hand side, data types must match, and you have to remember that square and square root can only return real numbers, not integers, but these two can return either integers or real numbers, but we typically use round and random range with integers. Take note, there's only one parameter for square, SQR. And let's move on to the next active number, 4.1.5. Select a random real number between 0 and 1. Between 0 and 1. Okay, well, 0, comma, and 2 will be my parameters. So we can say rnum equals random range. Okay, you can't get a random real number, you can only get a random integer. And between 0 and 1, well, between, which means it mustn't be 0 and it mustn't be 1, so that is a little bit dumb. So anyway, there we go. If they said from 0 to 1, this is only going to return one number, and that's 1. Why? Because the lowest value is 1 and the highest value is 1. So that question is a little bit moot. I don't think that is a very good question to put in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that question. What did I do? I just highlighted and pressed delete on the keyboard. Okay. Don't like it. We're not going to do that. Next one is round the number 1578.99. So we say inum equals round 178.99, and that number obviously is going to be 179. Oh, 1578. Well, doesn't matter, it's 1578. Okay, round the number 42.78 down to the nearest integer. Well, that's just rounding it, that's it. 42.78, the same thing. Inum, take note it's an integer, equals inum equals round, and in brackets, what are we going to round to? What number are we rounding? 42.78, 2.78. So there it is. And the next one is select a random between 1 and 6, including 6. You know, they use the word between, so we're going to go with it. So from 2 to 6. So what they mean is they want a number from 2 to 6, because including 6. Okay, so inum integer equals random range 2, 7. Why? Because we want 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So remember, the second one is always one more than the highest number that you can get, and the first one you want to include in the random number that is picked by the processor. So you learned about round, you learned about square root, you learned about random range, and you learned about square. Now we're going to go and do an activity 4.8.1, which is calculating the hypotenuse for a right-angled triangle, obviously, and we're going to display the hypotenuse in this big white block here. Let's go and have a look at our program. This big white block is a rich edit. Now this is probably the first time you've seen a rich edit, so that's fine, you can do it. We have 2 edit boxes and we have a rich edit. Now what is the hypotenuse? There it is. The hypotenuse is the length of the side that's opposite the right angle in a right angle triangle. And how do you calculate it? The hypotenuse is the square root of the side 1 squared plus side 2 squared. So as you can see, we have some calculations to do. First we get our input, EDT side 1 and EDT side 2. We need 2 variables, VAR. Now I'm going to make them real numbers. We don't know, maybe the triangle's got decimal points on its sides, so R side 1, comma R side 2, colon real. And for the hypotenuse, R hypo, R hype. I'll make it hype. So they're all real numbers. You'll deal with real numbers only. Now, we get our input from our edit boxes. R side 1 equals the edit box called EDT side 1 dot text, R side 2 EDT side 2 dot text. But you can't do that. There's no ways you can do that, because what's on the left hand side? A real number. What's on the right hand side? A string. So we've got to convert one of them so that they match. In programming, you've got to make sure your left hand side and your right hand side have the same data types. So I'm just going to take this one on the right hand side, string to float. I don't want to convert the left hand side because I want to do calculations with a real number. Okay, so string to float, string to float. Oops, it's a string. A string's in the edit box, okay. EDT1 edside1.text and edside2.text. That is our property from our edit box, that we're taking that string and we're converting it to a real number, which is called float, string to float. Opposite what we did in the previous activity, we went float to string. Now we're doing string to float, so we can match the real numbers on the left hand side. And what is r height going to be? Now we can do our calculation. Equals square root of the square of r side 1 plus the square of r side 2. There it is. But take note of the brackets. And this is the tricky part. Square and then r side 1 in brackets, square r side 2 in brackets, because remember when we did our square there was only one thing in brackets, there. And square root has got to have one thing in brackets, and we're putting all of that in. That's the one number that's in brackets there. Calculation. So square root has only got that, and now we're going to display that in our rich edit. First time you're going to display in a rich edit. So we go and find the name red display. Red display. How do we display in a rich edit? We say red display dot lines dot add, and then open brackets, we put a string. Can you see that little tooltip over there? It says constant s colon string. So we're putting r hype in there. R hype. How are we going to put r hype? We can't put a real number in a string. So what we're going to do? Float to string. And why not? Let's format it. Or we can just go and put it in like that. But remember about brackets. R hype, float to string must have r hype in brackets, and this whole thing is going into the rich edit dot lines dot add. Now you have to just memorize how to display things in a rich edit. It's always rich edit dot lines dot add and then open brackets. Different to a label, different to other components, so memorize that. Now they don't say that you must round it off or anything, so I'm not rounding, I'm just saying float to string. They didn't tell me to round off, so why must I? Right, I'll put some real numbers in here just for fun. Calculate the hypotenuse. Can you see we have a big long number there? So it actually would be in our best interests to round it off, wouldn't it? Make it look decent. And also we should go and put in and say hypotenuse equals, join that to, let's get it so that you can see, join that to our float to string. But we don't want to just join it to float to string, we want to join to float to string f. And then in this r hype we have to go comma ff fixed, comma 8, let's make it 1 decimal place, just for fun. So there's our rich edit.lines.add statement with the strings in here, and we have formatted r hype so that has got 1 decimal place. So that is that. Done. Now you're going to try and do this by yourself, and if you don't understand, you just got to go and watch the video again, and you'll hear from me tomorrow.